Hey everyone, Lizzie Karen here. Yesterday I went to Edfu to check out the Edfu texts because everyone told me that these texts had comments about Atlantis on them, and so hence I really needed to go and have a look for myself, see what I thought about it. So I got to Edfu with my guide, NEXT, and it really is quite lovely. These statues of Horus are just stunning. You could just stare at them for hours. It's a relatively recent, I say recent temple. It's still BCE, but I think it's Ptolemaic, but it's a lovely temple, and it's still in reasonably good condition, which is nice. So you go into the entrance way, and the first thing you see is this cute little area off to one side, and then you keep walking and you get to the main entrance, and that is where the first two statues of Horus in bird form are. And there are some amazing carvings on the temple wall as you're going in. So there's the usual smiting carvings, and then you enter into this big area with lots of columns, and it's easy to see this is all dynastic work because the columns are in pieces. They're not single pieces of stone like they would be if it was either the prior civilization, i.e. my people, or if it was one of the artisans of Tantal. So this is definitely the handiwork of the late dynastic Egyptians, but it's still very beautiful. And there's some more lovely statues. You can see the size of them when you compare them to NEXT and to me. Then passing through the two bird statues into the next entranceway, there's some more beautiful columns with lots of very, very interesting hieroglyphics. So I just took as many pictures and video footage of the interesting hieroglyphics that I could, because there was a lot here that I hadn't seen before.
Is here on the inside, as well. You can find the scrolls of Jehuti. Now, are you familiar with the Library of Alexandria, right?
Yes.
And so, while many take it to be an apocryphal work,
NEXT explained how the Ptolemaic hieroglyphics had a lot more in it. There was a lot of new hieroglyphics. So hence there's a few things I hadn't seen before. According to the Egyptologists, this temple took 180 years to build from start to finish. And they're perfectly happy with that number, and yet they say that the Great Pyramid took 20 years to complete, and yet it was so much bigger, required heaps more resources. The blocks were much bigger than these blocks, and it was so much more complex, and the number of the blocks, etc. How do they reconcile that? I mean, I really only have one comment, and that's, seriously? They really believe that? Anyway, 180 years to build this, yes. Yes, I believe that. And I think that, not taking away anything from the dynastic Egyptians, they did a mighty fine job.
process all around the wall, but this is a concentration to the temple. Here they're pouring foundation deposits, which are found inside the temple. finding these foundation deposits underneath the temple. Shows the nature on the soul.
Here you can see very clearly how some of the carvings have been, let's just say, scratched out. It's not clear why that is, but I have a theory. Because in my dream regressions, I experienced how the dynastic Egyptians loved everything that they considered to be of the ancients, and in fact considered anything of the ancients to be magic, including any pictures of them. So my theory is that it was the superstitious people who had this desire for the magic, so-called magic, of the ancients, and they thought by scraping off bits of the wall which had a picture of the ancients, they might be able to get medicine or some form of magic out of it. But I don't know for sure. This is purely a guess on my part. So that's my theory anyway. Back to some interesting looking hieroglyphics. They kind of look intriguing looking, so I just took a picture of them. This one made me think how much I would give an arm and a leg to be able to read hieroglyphics. This temple was very reminiscent of the temple at Dendera. It seemed to have a very similar layout and a really similar kind of look and feel to it. So as I was walking through and experiencing it all, I had a few feelings of deja vu, and it was purely because there was so much in it that was very, very similar to Dendera. There's a kind of weird shadow on the wall here. I have no idea what it is. I didn't think there was anything around me moving. Maybe there was some plastic on the roof or something. That was kind of weird. Coming up is a fun symbol because it looks very much like a Wi-Fi symbol. Of course it's not, but isn't that cool?
Had geologist Susan Moore take a look at the steps at Dendera and Hathor, and she's convinced that it just has to do with the depression of people walking on the steps over time. Well, that's what that is. That's what's happening right here. This is all from people walking. But then you have this too, this little buildup.
NEXT was saying how this is where the golden statue of Horus should have been. And the place that it probably sat in looks a lot like one of the carvings or the statues that were laying on the ground in Elephantine Island. But yeah, it's looked quite interesting. Very much like Elephantine.
Exactly.
Still, are there some bats in there?
Sometimes.
Oh, I love bats.
I'm going to go first and see. That's fine.
This is cool. Interesting doorway.
This is the way up to the roof, but that's going to be blocked off. Closed here.
Have a sneak peek.
You can go a little further, you can go to the right, you go down, a bit, to the left.
So I'm still looking at hieroglyphics, but mainly looking for bats, if you know what I mean. No bats in here, sadly. This is a hat I haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's
Every now and again you'd see some really badly damaged bits of the staircase, and it didn't look like it was because it was overly worn. I mean, possibly it could be dripped on from above, as suggested by NEXT, but it's just intriguing. And also whenever I see anything that looks like interesting tool marks, I also collect pictures of that, as you can see.
yeah, you can go up. This is similar to Dendera with the spiral going up.
Okay, I'm coming.
Usually it's locked at the top. I want to see if they have it open. Yeah, it's locked.
That's okay, it's still interesting just going up there.
That's the blue paint. That's cool.
Oh, where's the blue? Yeah. And we regularly came across this sort of thing, which is a shaft which happens to be in the exact same location as the crypts in Dendera. So one could fairly safely assume that there are a fair number of crypts in this temple too. And finally, I find them, the bats. Oh, they're so cute. Oh, they're so cute.
Holding the hair of the enemies, and you have appears to be 3 registers, and I think, is it 7 if you count across? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, no, it's 8. 8 hands. But it might have something to do with vibration or vibrational energy, because is he holding, it's a few enemies and hitting them and causing a vibration, or is it the bulk of enemies? This one is interesting. He has the serpent around the neck.
Oh yeah, I didn't see that.
Horus, and they're pulling the clap and they're closed. So this is what we would say is midday hunting. They have all sort of, fish, animals. These are the animals of Set, the orcs. You have the lapwing, the birds, anything with wings. And from the symbolist perspective, anything with wings represents something spiritual. That people refer to as the Edfu building text that some try to attribute to Atlantis.
Yeah, it seems like a stretch, but I wanted to see it for myself. It talks about the island of the egg.
Right.
And
The egg part is intended to give a story from the island. It's the primordial. The island is the same story. It's cosmology. Well, my understanding of it, at least, is that it's all an analogy of cosmology. And the egg is the beginning of creation. It's a way of saying the primordial mound. The primordial mound is that island from which all creation rose. So this is the cosmology.
So this is essentially the area of the Edfu texts where they talk about an island, which some people have come to interpret to be Atlantis. So I did a bit of research and I did some reading, and this is my take. It seems to me that these texts are mostly very practical and talk about, the building of the temple and so forth. And yet there seems to be a bit of a mishmash in the bits where they talk about the creation myth. It's almost like they've taken the creation myth and they've just thrown in a little bit of the story of Atlantis. But why? And it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It doesn't quite gel. But, if they actually thought that Atlantis, or what I know as Tantal, was around the start of creation, well, I think they're just very confused and they're mixing up their myths. But I really don't know. It's not a subject matter that I'm that familiar with. So the myths of the ancient Egyptians, can't help but wonder where they came from, and if they did in fact get a few things a bit mixed up along the way. Because remember, an awful lot of time has passed between when the ancients were in Egypt and when this temple was actually built. It's not just a matter of 100 years or so, it's a matter of thousands and thousands of years. So it's quite possible that they kind of lost the full meaning of the stories that they had that were left from the past. So this is what they call the Edfu texts.
Yeah. there's a specific there's building text in the front, which have the foundation deposits, the foundation ritual, which is actually the building text of the Edfu temple. Then outside the girdle wall, there's another text which refers to, it's basically a recipe for temple building.
A few more interesting carvings and hieroglyphics on the way out. Very interesting. And as we were heading out, once again, on to one side was that cute little area that NEXD commented that was for dreaming. So that's always interesting to me. And off we then went for a much needed coffee.